The Shadow in the Park. In the early 2000s, Moscow's sprawling Bitsevsky Park became the hunting ground for one of Russia's most prolific serial killers. Bodies were appearing with disturbing frequency, beaten, strangled, and callously disposed of in sewers and drainage systems. The victims were primarily elderly men, alcoholics, or homeless individuals, the forgotten souls of society. The police initially dismissed the deaths as isolated incidents, but a pattern was emerging that would shock the nation. Behind these brutal killings was one man, Alexander Pichushkin. His terrifying ambition? To murder 64 people, one for each square on a chessboard. While others played games for sport or intellectual challenge, Pichushkin played for blood. Russia was about to uncover one of its most calculating killers, a man who would become known across the world simply as the Chessboard Killer. A troubled beginning. Alexander Yurievich Pichushkin was born on April 9, 1974 in the Karacharovo district of Moscow. His early childhood showed no obvious signs of the horror he would later inflict. Raised primarily by his grandfather after his parents separated, young Alexander initially appeared to be an ordinary child, even showing signs of above-average intelligence. However, at age 4, his life took a dramatic turn when he fell backward from a swing, striking his head forcefully on the ground. The injury required hospitalization, and afterward, those close to him began noticing disturbing changes in his behavior. His grandfather, once his anchor, passed away when Alexander was still young, removing a crucial stabilizing influence from his life. This combination of neurological trauma and emotional loss would later become significant talking points when psychologists attempted to understand the origins of his murderous impulses. But even those who recognized the early warning signs could never have predicted the monster he would become. The outcast. Throughout his school years, Pichushkin struggled to fit in. Classmates recalled him as awkward and increasingly aggressive. He was frequently bullied for a stutter that developed after his childhood head injury, fueling a simmering resentment toward his peers. Teachers remembered him as intelligent but troubling, capable of brilliance yet prone to outbursts. As a teenager, his behavior took a darker turn. He began torturing animals, a classic warning sign of emerging psychopathy. Neighborhood pets would sometimes disappear, only to be found mutilated. Fellow students recalled incidents where he exhibited extreme cruelty, including an episode where he dangled a younger boy from a high window, seemingly enjoying the child's terror. These weren't merely the actions of a troubled teen, they were the rehearsals of a budding killer. A classic warning sign of emerging psychopathy. Neighborhood pets would sometimes disappear, only to be found mutilated. Fellow students recalled incidents where he exhibited extreme cruelty, including an episode where he dangled a younger boy from a high window, seemingly enjoying the child's terror. These weren't merely the actions of a troubled teen, they were the rehearsals of a budding killer. Despite these red flags, no serious intervention was made. The Soviet education system, focused on conformity rather than mental health, failed to identify the dangerous storm brewing within Alexander Pichushkin. The chess prodigy. In his teenage years, Alexander discovered chess, a game that would later inform his murderous methodology in disturbing ways. He displayed remarkable talent for the strategic board game, quickly mastering its complex patterns and becoming something of a local prodigy. For hours, he would sit alone in Moscow parks, analyzing positions and studying the classic games of Russian grandmasters. Chess provided the structure and control that his chaotic mind craved. It was a world where he could dominate, where every piece moved according to his will. His grandfather had taught him the basics before his death, creating a bittersweet connection to the game. For Pichushkin, chess represented power, the ability to manipulate, sacrifice, and ultimately destroy opponents through superior strategy. Little did anyone realize that this innocent board game would later inspire his grotesque ambition to kill one person for each of the 64 squares on a chessboard. In the mind of the developing killer, human lives were already being reduced to pieces in his twisted game. The first kill. The transformation from troubled youth to killer happened in 1992, when Pichushkin was only 18 years old. His first victim was not random, but deliberately chosen, a former classmate named Mikhail Odichuk. The two had reportedly argued over a game of chess, with Pichushkin feeling humiliated by his defeat. Seeking revenge, he lured Odychuk to Bitsevsky Park, a sprawling forest area in southern Moscow that would later become his primary hunting ground. There, in a moment that would mark the beginning of his murderous career, Pichushkin pushed his former friend into a storm sewer. Odychuk drowned in the filthy water, trapped and alone. The murder went unsolved, just another mysterious death in post-Soviet Russia, where police resources were stretched thin and investigative protocols were often rudimentary. This successful first kill taught Pichushkin a crucial and dangerous lesson. Murder was easy, and he could get away with it. Emboldened but patient, he would wait nearly a decade before killing again, refining his techniques and developing the methodology that would eventually make him one of Russia's most notorious serial killers. The silent years. Between his first murder in 1992 and the beginning of his killing spree in 2001, Pichushkin lived a seemingly normal life, a period of dormancy that criminologists find both fascinating and disturbing. During these 9 years, he worked various menial jobs, including as a grocery store clerk and security guard. He lived with his mother and maintained few close relationships. Those who knew him described him as strange but harmless, a loner with poor social skills who kept to himself. What they didn't see was the rage simmering beneath the surface. Pichushkin later told investigators that during this time, he was planning, observing, and preparing for what would become his reign of terror. He studied the rhythms of Bitsevsky Park, noting the isolated areas and the types of people who frequented them. He perfected his approach to potential victims, learning how to appear trustworthy and non-threatening. This period of restraint and preparation illustrates the calculating nature of his psychopathy, the ability to wait patiently for the perfect moment to strike. When he finally resumed killing in 2001, it was with a refined methodology and a clear objective. The killing spree begins. In 2001, after nearly a decade of dormancy, Pichushkin's murderous urges resurfaced with terrifying intensity. His second victim was an elderly man he encountered in Bitsevsky Park, a pattern that would become his signature. Using vodka as bait, he befriended the man, suggesting they drink together at a secluded spot where he claimed he had buried a bottle after his military service, a common practice in Russia. Once they reached the isolated location, Pichushkin struck with brutal efficiency, bludgeoning the man with a hammer before disposing of the body in a sewer. This method, luring victims with alcohol to secluded areas of the park, would become his standard approach. The park, spanning over 200 acres of forest and ponds, provided the perfect cover for his crimes. Bodies could remain undiscovered for weeks or months, especially when pushed into the labyrinthine drainage system that ran beneath the area. What began as a trickle would soon become a flood. Between 2001 and 2006, Pichushkin would kill with increasing frequency, sometimes claiming multiple victims in a single week. The Chessboard Killer had truly begun his game. The psychology of a predator. What drives a man to commit such atrocities? Pichushkin's psychology represents a textbook case of psychopathy with distinctive narcissistic elements. Unlike many serial killers who are motivated by sexual gratification, Pichushkin killed purely for the thrill of power and control. In his own chilling words during interrogation, "For me, life without murder is like life without food for you." He described the sensation of murder as an almost transcendent experience, a rush more powerful than any drug. Each killing elevated him to a godlike status in his own mind, allowing him to decide who lived and who died. Psychologists who later studied him noted his complete lack of empathy, coupled with an inflated sense of self-importance. The chess metaphor was particularly revealing. He viewed himself as the player, while his victims were merely pieces to be captured and removed from the board. His choice of victims, predominantly elderly men and alcoholics, further reflected his predatory nature, targeting those who were vulnerable and less likely to be immediately missed. In Pichushkin's distorted worldview, he wasn't committing crimes. He was creating art through death, the vodka bottle signature. As his killing spree intensified, Pichushkin developed a macabre signature that would baffle investigators and horrify forensic experts. After bludgeoning his victims to death, he would insert an empty vodka bottle into their skulls, forcing it into the wound with disturbing precision. This grotesque calling card served multiple purposes in his twisted logic. First, it ensured the victim was truly dead, eliminating any chance of survival. Second, it created a distinctive mark that he could claim as his own, a signature as unique as an artist's on a canvas. But perhaps most disturbingly, this grotesque calling card served multiple purposes in his twisted logic. First, it ensured the victim was truly dead, eliminating any chance of survival. Second, it created a distinctive mark that he could claim as his own, a signature as unique as an artist's on a canvas. But perhaps most disturbingly, Pichushkin later explained that the bottle served as a vent for the soul to escape the body, revealing the pseudo-philosophical justifications he had constructed around his crimes. The vodka bottle also held symbolic significance in Russian culture, where alcoholism was a widespread social problem. By using the very substance that had made many of his victims vulnerable, Pichushkin was making a cruel commentary on their lives and deaths. This distinctive MO eventually helped investigators link the murders, though it would take years before they realized the full extent of his crimes. The hunting ground. Bitsevsky Park, the second largest forest park in Moscow, became synonymous with terror during Pichushkin's killing spree. Spanning over 2,200 acres of dense woodland, hiking trails, and recreational areas, it had once been a beloved escape from the urban sprawl of Moscow. Families picnicked there, lovers strolled its paths, and elderly residents enjoyed peaceful walks among its trees. Pichushkin transformed this urban paradise into his personal hunting ground. He knew every trail, every secluded glade, and every drainage entrance. The park's size and complexity worked to his advantage. Bodies could remain hidden for weeks or even months, especially when disposed of in the extensive sewer system beneath the park. He chose his attack locations with tactical precision, always selecting spots far from surveillance cameras and regular patrol routes. As his killings increased, the park's very nature began to change. What was once filled with laughter and conversation became eerily quiet, as Muscovites avoided the area out of fear. Signs warning people not to walk alone began appearing at entrances. The chessboard killer had not only claimed human lives, he had stolen the innocence of one of Moscow's most treasured public spaces. The victims of Alexander Pichushkin tell a story of calculated target selection. While he initially focused on elderly men and alcoholics, people who lived on society's margins and might not be immediately missed, his victim profile eventually expanded. Of his confirmed victims, approximately 48 were men and 3 were women. Most were older than 40, with many in their 60s or 70s. The common thread connecting them was vulnerability, whether through intoxication, physical frailty, or social isolation. Pichushkin became adept at identifying these vulnerabilities, approaching potential victims with offers of friendship or shared drinks. One victim, Nikolai Tikhomarov, was a 74-year-old veteran who frequented the park to feed birds. Another, Yuri Kuznetsov, was a homeless man who Pichushkin befriended over several weeks before killing him. Maria Viracheva, one of his few female victims, was a pregnant store clerk whom he threw into a sewage well. Remarkably, she survived the attack but was too terrified to report it. Each victim represented a square on his mental chessboard, a life extinguished to satisfy his morbid ambition. Behind the statistics were real people with families, histories, and futures, all cut short by a man who saw them not as humans, but as tallies in his gruesome game, a city in fear. As bodies continued to appear in Bitsevsky Park through 2003 and 2004, Moscow began to realize a predator was in their midst. Local newspapers published warnings about a potential serial killer operating in the southern district of the city. Parents forbade their children from entering the park. Elderly residents, once regular visitors to the area, now locked themselves in their apartments, afraid to venture out. The city's mood shifted from annoyance at the police's inability to solve the crimes to genuine fear. Street vendors near the park reported a dramatic drop in business. Local psychiatric hospitals received an influx of paranoid patients convinced they were being stalked. Witnesses described seeing strange men in the park, leading to numerous false reports and misidentifications. Meanwhile, Pichushkin moved freely among the populace, working at a grocery store, riding the metro, and living a seemingly normal life. He monitored news reports about his crimes with growing satisfaction, taking pride in the fear he was creating. The public gave the unknown killer various nicknames: the Park Maniac, the Bitsevsky Beast, but the one that would stick after his capture was the Chessboard Killer, a name that captured both his methodology and his twisted ambition to claim 64 victims. The police investigation. The investigation into the Bitsevsky Park murders was plagued by challenges from the start. In post-Soviet Russia, law enforcement was understaffed, underfunded, and often overwhelmed by the crime wave that accompanied the transition to capitalism. Initial deaths in the park were treated as isolated incidents, accidents, robberies gone wrong, or disputes among the homeless. It wasn't until 2003, when bodies began appearing with the distinctive vodka bottle signature, that investigators recognized they were dealing with a serial killer. Even then, progress was slow. The park's vast size made thorough searches nearly impossible. Many victims remained unidentified, their bodies too decomposed for proper forensic analysis. The police formed a special task force, but leads were few. They stationed undercover officers in the park and distributed sketches based on vague witness descriptions. But Pichushkin remained elusive. Some investigators later admitted that socioeconomic bias played a role in the delayed response. Because many victims were homeless or alcoholics, their deaths weren't prioritized. This investigation would later be cited as a case study in how not to handle serial murder cases, with critics pointing to the compartmentalized approach that failed to connect related crimes until the body count had risen significantly. The chess connection. The connection between Pichushkin's murders and the game of chess was not initially apparent to investigators. It was only after his capture that this disturbing link came to light. In his apartment, police discovered a chessboard with dates written on 61 of the 64 squares, each corresponding to a murder. This physical manifestation of his killing spree revealed the methodical nature of his crimes. Chess wasn't just a hobby for Pichushkin, it was a framework for his murderous philosophy. The game's emphasis on strategy, sacrifice, and ultimate domination mirrored his approach to killing. In chess, pawns are often sacrificed for a strategic advantage. In Pichushkin's distorted worldview, his victims were merely pawns in his grand game against society. He later told psychiatrists that he viewed himself as a player on a higher plane, manipulating human pieces according to his will. The chessboard also represented his goal, to reach 64 kills, filling every square. This objective gave his killings purpose and structure in his disordered mind. The chess connection became central to media coverage of the case, capturing public imagination and cementing Pichushkin's place in the dark pantheon of history's most notorious serial killers. The survivor who escaped. In the winter of 2005, Pichushkin made a rare mistake that could have ended his killing spree. Maria Viricheva, a 19-year-old pregnant woman who worked at the same grocery store as Pichushkin, became one of his targets. After luring her to Bitsevsky Park, he attacked her and threw her into a sewage well, his preferred method of disposal. But unlike his other victims, Viricheva survived the fall. In the darkness of the sewer, she managed to grab onto pipes and eventually climb out of the drainage system, a feat that seemed almost miraculous given her pregnant condition and the injuries she had sustained. Terrified and in shock, Viricheva fled Moscow without reporting the attack to police. Her silence allowed Pichushkin to continue killing for another year. When investigators later questioned why she hadn't come forward, she explained that she feared retribution and didn't believe the police would protect her, a common sentiment in post-Soviet Russia where trust in law enforcement was low. Her survival was only discovered after Pichushkin's eventual arrest, when she recognized his face on television and finally came forward. Her testimony provided crucial insights into his attack methodology and helped prosecutors build their case. The grocery store clerk. Throughout his killing spree, Pichushkin maintained employment at a local grocery store in southern Moscow. The juxtaposition between his mundane day job and his secret life as a serial killer created a disturbing double existence. To his co-workers, he was just Alexander, quiet, somewhat odd, but generally unremarkable. He stocked shelves, operated the cash register, and interacted with customers without raising suspicion. Some colleagues later recalled that he seemed to take particular interest in elderly shoppers, often offering to help them carry their bags, a chilling detail in retrospect. The grocery store served as more than just employment. It was also a hunting ground. Pichushkin occasionally targeted customers, particularly elderly men who shopped alone, striking up conversations and eventually suggesting they share a drink in nearby Bitsevsky Park. He also recruited at least one victim from among his co-workers, Marina Moskalyova, whose murder would ultimately lead to his capture. The store's proximity to the park made it a convenient base of operations. This ability to blend into society while carrying out his crimes exemplifies what criminologists call the mask of sanity, the capacity of psychopaths to appear normal while concealing their true nature. Escalation and boldness. As time passed without capture, Pichushkin's confidence grew dangerously. What began as calculated, carefully spaced murders evolved into an increasingly frenzied killing spree. By 2005, he was killing as often as once a week. His methods became less cautious, attacking in daylight and in areas where discovery was more likely. He began keeping trophies from some victims, small personal items that held no value except as mementos of his crimes. Most disturbing was his growing desire for recognition. He started intentionally leaving bodies where they would be discovered more quickly, wanting his work to be acknowledged. In one particularly brazen move, he recorded a murder on his cell phone, a gruesome video that investigators would later find on his device. This escalation pattern matches what criminologists call the serial killer's curve, a progression from careful, methodical killings to increasingly risky and frequent attacks. This pattern often leads to mistakes and eventually capture. Pichushkin later explained this escalation in chilling terms. In the beginning, I set a goal for myself to kill one person per month. But it's addictive, like a drug. You want more and more. The fatal mistake. After claiming dozens of lives, Pichushkin's downfall came through a surprisingly simple oversight. On June 14, 2006, he invited his co-worker, 48-year-old Marina Moskalyova, for a walk in Bitsevsky Park to visit his dog's grave, a ruse he had used successfully with previous victims. Moskalyova, perhaps sensing something amiss, left a note for her son indicating she was going for a walk with Pichushkin. When she failed to return home that evening, her son immediately contacted police and showed them the note. This simple act of maternal precaution would unravel years of unsolved murders. Police quickly identified Pichushkin from the grocery store's employee records and began surveillance. Their suspicions were confirmed when security camera footage from the metro station nearest to the park showed Pichushkin and Moskalyova entering together on the day of her disappearance, but only Pichushkin exiting alone. Within days, Moskalyova's body was discovered in a drainage well in the park, bearing the same injuries as dozens of other victims. On June 16, 2006, police arrested Alexander Pichushkin at his apartment. The reign of the Chessboard Killer was finally over, stopped not by brilliant detective work but by a mother's careful note to her son, the confession. When brought in for questioning, investigators expected resistance or denial, the typical response of captured killers. Instead, they encountered something far more disturbing: pride. Alexander Pichushkin not only confessed to killing Marina Moskalyova, but eagerly admitted to dozens more murders, expressing disappointment that he had been caught before reaching his goal of 64 victims. His confession was delivered with a calm detachment that chilled even seasoned detectives. "I killed 61 people," he stated matter-of-factly, as if discussing a sports achievement. When asked to provide details, Pichushkin described his crimes with photographic precision, recalling specific dates, locations, and victims' reactions moments before death. To verify his claims, police took him to Bitsevsky Park in handcuffs, where he methodically led them to multiple murder sites, including places where bodies had never been recovered. His detailed knowledge convinced investigators they had indeed captured one of Russia's most prolific serial killers. Perhaps most disturbing was his explanation for confessing: "I wanted the world to know about the greatness of my work." For Pichushkin, capture wasn't defeat, it was recognition. The chessboard evidence. The most damning and symbolically powerful piece of evidence against Pichushkin was the chessboard found in his apartment. This was no ordinary game board. It had been transformed into a macabre accounting system for his murders. Of the 64 squares, 61 contained dates or numbers, each corresponding to a killing. Some squares contained newspaper clippings about particular murders he was especially proud of. This chessboard became both the physical evidence of his crimes and the source of his infamous nickname. Forensic psychologists noted that the board represented more than just a tally. It was a manifestation of the structure and purpose Pichushkin had assigned to his killing spree. During his interrogation, he expressed genuine frustration at being captured 3 victims short of his goal. The last 3 squares, he lamented, would have been the most perfect crimes. The chessboard was prominently displayed during his trial, serving as a stark visual reminder of the scale of his crimes. Today, it remains in the Moscow Police Evidence Archives, a disturbing artifact from one of Russia's darkest criminal cases. Psychological assessment. Following his arrest, Pichushkin underwent extensive psychological evaluation by Russia's top forensic psychiatrists. Their findings painted a portrait of a classic psychopath with narcissistic delusions. Despite speculation about the role of his childhood head injury, experts concluded that his condition was primarily psychopathic rather than neurological. Tests revealed an individual with average intelligence but profound emotional deficits, unable to feel empathy, remorse, or form normal human connections. Most disturbing was his perception of murder as a form of self-expression. "When I killed, I felt like God," he told evaluators. "I decided who would live and who would die." Psychiatrists noted his complete detachment when discussing his crimes. He showed more emotion when talking about chess than when describing how he had ended human lives. They also identified his pathological need for recognition and his view of himself as superior to society's rules. When asked if he understood that killing was wrong, he replied, "For ordinary people, yes, but I am not ordinary." Despite these findings, he was deemed legally sane, capable of understanding the criminal nature of his actions, even if he rejected society's moral framework. The trial of the century. In October 2007, Alexander Pichushkin went on trial in a Moscow courtroom that quickly became the focus of international attention. The proceedings were unprecedented in Russia's modern judicial history. He was formally charged with 49 murders and 3 attempted murders, though he claimed responsibility for 61 deaths. The courtroom was filled with families of victims, journalists, and curious citizens trying to comprehend the monster who had terrorized their city. Pichushkin was held in a glass box, standard practice for dangerous defendants in Russia, from which he often smiled at the cameras or made grandiose statements. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, including his videotaped confessions, the chessboard, DNA evidence, and testimony from the few who had survived his attacks. Throughout the trial, Pichushkin showed no remorse. When given the opportunity to address the court, he spoke not of regret but of achievement, comparing himself to other notorious killers and suggesting he had surpassed them. "I'm a natural-born killer," he declared, "just like certain people are born artists." The families of victims wept as he recounted their loved ones' final moments with clinical detachment. It was a trial that forced Russian society to confront not just a killer, but the darkest possibilities of human nature. Justice served. On October 29, 2007, after deliberating for just over 2 hours, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on all counts. Judge Vladimir Usov sentenced Alexander Pichushkin to life imprisonment, the maximum possible punishment, as Russia had instituted a moratorium on the death penalty. The sentence included the unusual stipulation that he spend the first 15 years in solitary confinement. As the verdict was read, Pichushkin remained emotionless, his only reaction coming when the judge mentioned his failure to complete his goal of 64 killings. "I would have caught up with Chikatilo," he muttered, referring to Andrei Chikatilo, another notorious Russian serial killer who had murdered 52 people. The victims' families expressed mixed reactions. Some felt justice had been served, while others believed death would have been the only appropriate punishment. Pichushkin was transferred to a special regime penal colony known as Black Dolphin, Russia's highest security prison, located near the Kazakhstan border. There he would join other serial killers and terrorists in what many consider Russia's version of a supermax facility, spending 23 hours a day in a cell designed to house Russia's most dangerous criminals. Life behind bars. Alexander Pichushkin now resides in Penal Colony Number 6, known as Black Dolphin, Russia's most secure prison, reserved for the country's worst offenders. His daily existence is strictly regimented and designed to prevent any possibility of escape or influence. He lives in a small cell with bare necessities, his movements severely restricted. Guards check on him every 15 minutes. He is allowed outside his cell for only 1 hour of exercise daily, walking in a small, specially designed area where he cannot see beyond the prison walls. According to prison officials, Pichushkin has adapted to incarceration with the same detached calculation that characterized his crimes. He reads extensively, primarily chess books and Russian classics. He rarely speaks to other inmates but has given occasional interviews to psychologists studying serial killers. In these conversations, he has shown no remorse or psychological evolution. "I don't repent," he told one interviewer. "I love all my victims. I lived through all of them." The man who once played God in Bitsevsky Park now lives as prisoner number 272, his world reduced to a few square meters, a final, ironic parallel to the chessboard that once defined his murderous ambitions. A city healing. In the years following Pichushkin's arrest, Moscow began the slow process of reclaiming Bitsevsky Park from its dark association with the Chessboard Killer. City officials increased security, installing better lighting and surveillance cameras throughout the park. Police patrols became more frequent. Gradually, families and elderly residents returned to its paths and meadows. Memorial benches were placed near some of the locations where victims had been found, creating spaces for reflection and remembrance. Community organizations held events specifically designed to bring people back to the park: concerts, art exhibitions, and nature walks. Schools organized educational programs about the park's history and ecology, deliberately focusing on its natural beauty rather than its dark chapter. These efforts represented more than just practical safety measures. They were part of a psychological healing process for a city traumatized by the knowledge that a predator had moved freely among them. Today, most young Muscovites know Bitsevsky Park only as a beautiful green space, its connection to Alexander Pichushkin fading into history. This transformation speaks to the resilience of communities in the face of tragedy, the human capacity to reclaim spaces from the shadow of evil. The legacy of the Chessboard Killer. Alexander Pichushkin's case remains one of the most studied in modern criminology, offering disturbing insights into the psychology of serial murder. His crimes transformed how Russian law enforcement approaches homicide investigations, leading to better coordination between districts and more attention to patterns suggesting serial offenses. The case also highlighted the vulnerability of society's margins, the elderly, the homeless, and those struggling with addiction, spurring conversation about social services and community protection. For criminologists, Pichushkin represents a rare pure example of a hedonistic power killer, someone who murders solely for the gratification of control over life and death. His detailed confessions provided unprecedented access to the mind of a psychopath, contributing to our understanding of these dangerous individuals. Yet perhaps his most significant legacy lies in what his case reveals about the human capacity for both evil and resilience. In the shadow of one man's monstrous actions, we find countless examples of courage, from survivors who escaped to tell their stories, to the families who endured unimaginable loss with dignity, to communities that refused to surrender their public spaces to fear. The Chessboard Killer sought immortality through murder, but Moscow ultimately defined itself not by his crimes, but by its recovery from them. The end.